Some people have told me, they say, I've been having headaches ever since the car accident, but I figured it was due to stress. And I'm like, let's get you to someone who can tell you if that's the case or not.
Yeah, rather than us all sitting around guessing and playing doctor, let's let the actual doctors figure out what's going on.
The Concussion Center proudly presents Talk-N-Headz, a podcast based on all things related to head injuries. This is not just a show about concussion. In this series, we take an in-depth look at the brain and its function specifically after there is trauma. Hosted by Brent Jones, Antonio Walden, and Dr. Robert Allen, Talk-N-Headz was created to give a realistic perspective to head injuries. So sit back, relax, and let us fill your head with brain knowledge.
All right, welcome back to another installment of your favorite podcast, Talk-N-Headz. Once again, you have me, the good child, Antonio, the marketing director for the Concussion Center. And once again, you have the rogues, Brent and Rob, out doing what Brent and Rob do. I assume they're still arguing.
I just assume Brent's out, whining and dining, making you do all the work.
Probably, or they're still trying to finish the 3-hour Batman movie, which I warned them not to watch. But at any rate, you have us here, and you have with us one of the most attentive law firms I've run across in not just Atlanta, but the state of Georgia. Two attorneys who will drive to no ends of the earth to meet with their clients, see their clients, get things in line for their clients. A firm I love working with, a firm I love just hanging out with. Two attorneys that, whether we're talking about barbecuing meat on the grill or how they barbecue insurances in the courtroom, it's always a good conversation. So without further ado,
we go and see our clients because we always come and stop by and meet you after we're at the hospital, signing them up.
Exactly. You guys are the only people who come up to Marietta to hang out with me. So that's a big one up for you in my book. But you guys have heard the voice of Chris, and Jared has been silent, but together they are the Bulldog law firm up in great old Alpharetta, Georgia. Guys, welcome to Talk-N-Headz.
Thanks. Happy to be here. And as usual, Chris is the outspoken one, and I'm just the silent assassin sitting back here taking it all in.
I like that though. It's the quiet ones you got to watch out for. Guys, I apologize it's taking this long to get you on the podcast. You guys honestly should have been one of the first episodes, but we got you here now, and we were talking beforehand, and we got a lot of good stuff. So let's just jump into it with the same way I jump into it with any and all attorneys. What got you guys into law?
I guess I'll go first. I got into law really in high school through the mock trial program here in Georgia. It's a great program. My dad was the coach at our high school. My dad was a lawyer, had his own law firm. So pretty much from the time I got to high school, I knew that was a path that I was headed down. But it wasn't just because I felt like I had to. I really, really enjoyed the mock trial program. In fact, stuck with mock trial from the time that I graduated high school. While I was in college, while I was in law school, I participated in it. I came back and helped coach the high school teams. And even after, probably for the first 10, 12 years of my practice, I still coached a local high school mock trial program. So I think I really can't speak highly enough of the Georgia mock trial program and the role that it had in getting me to where I am today.
I had a more roundabout way. I got a really bad speeding ticket, and I hired a lawyer, and he took it to trial and he won. And I was just in awe of the process, and ended up later on working for a judge in that same courthouse. And even further in my career, I started working for the government agency that covers prosecutors here in Georgia. And I ran into the same prosecutor who we had that trial with. And I got to tell him, I said, going there and going through that experience both slowed me down, but also interested me in the law. And so that experience sort of baptized me in it, and I loved it ever since.
What awed you so much about him going to trial and winning?
So evidence code was a little different back then, but what's really great is the radar or laser evidence at the time got pulled out, and it turned out that the evidence custodian never signed it. At least back then, you needed an evidence custodian to sign it to say that these logs were still good and maintained. And so he tried to then say he visually estimated my speed. And one of the best tricks, it's Heyman Law up in Gainesville, great lawyer, judge up there in the municipal court. reaches into his, or first says, "Have you ever seen a baseball game?" Cop says, "No, I don't really watch baseball." Says, "Have you ever seen a football game?" "Nah, I don't really watch football." He goes, "You ever watch car racing?" Cop says, "Yeah, I don't really watch that much TV, just trying to, be a pain." And finally, frustrated, Hammond-Law reaches into his pocket, grabs his car keys, and throws it at the witness bench, hits the front of the witness bench, and says, "How fast were my car keys going?" And he goes, "Well, I have no idea." He says, "Then you can't tell the speed of an item just by looking at it, can you?" And even before the trial, he told me that some of the motions and demurs he was going to make, that the judge and the prosecutor's jaw would be on the floor. And sure enough, it was this poor prosecutor's first bench trial in the juvenile court up there. And before the verdict was even read, he was telling the judge, "I know you're going to find him innocent, but and so it was just amazing to see that he went into what seemed like an unwinnable case and knew the law so well that he was able to win. And still a brilliant lawyer. I love teaming up with him on cases. And so here, when I was 16, he was my lawyer, and now me and him work together on cases, which is pretty cool.
That's an awesome story, and it leads into my follow-up question about what keeps you in law. So I guess for you, some of those relationships and being able to go into trials and be a bit unconventional is something that you like to do.
Oh yeah. We have a little competition here in the office of who can say the wildest things on the record.
Don't worry, I'm not going to ask you to tell any of the stories.
It's just not things that we say in the courtroom, but things that we put in pleadings and emails to opposing counsel. We get quite a chuckle out of.
Well, I had a hearing on attorney's fees for a case, and the other attorney accused me of working for free. And
how many lawyers work for free?
I told the judge, well, in this case, I was billing, but I wasn't collecting. And so I looked at the judge and I said, "Judge," I said, "until I have UNICEF stamped on my forehead, I don't work for free." So that's one of my better ones I think I've said in court before.
There's for anybody who did sports growing up, whether it was high school or collegiate, you get that, no matter how many times you've been in the same scenario, you get that rush, that adrenaline right before the game. It's still the same today for every time I walk into a courtroom, unless it's some perfunctory pre-worked out hearing. If it's anything that's contentious or adversarial at all, you get that same rush before you walk in the courtroom. And that's something that keeps you coming back, especially when you pull one out of the hat and you win one that you don't expect you're going to win. There's not much of a better feeling than that. People
don't realize when you prepare to go into these, it's win or lose. There's not a tie. There's not a middle ground. Mm-hmm. And kind of like, and Jared's right. I remember in high school sports, if you weren't involved, you might not understand. It's a battle and you're preparing beforehand. And it's a high stakes, battle to go into. So, it's an adrenaline rush, and probably the biggest adrenaline rush I participate in at all. And so it's pretty great.
And that's saying a lot coming from a guy who rides sport bikes.
Yeah, race motorcycles, but trust me, it is more nerve-wracking to step into a big trial.
Oh, so that's actually a great segue. So you guys deal with a lot, I'm not going to say primarily, but a lot of like motorcycle and that type of cases there in the firm. How prevalent have you seen head injuries come to play a role in those? And
almost every motorcycle accident has some level of head injury. And Tony, you might even recall, we had one, I think, that we recently sent your way, and we sent you a photo of the helmet.
I do.
It was collapsed in on one part. One look at a lot of these helmets after the wrecks, and you're like, you got to look at this guy's brain. We need to make sure it's okay.
And there's a reason that when you're involved in an accident with a helmet, you got to replace it every time. I mean, they really take a beating and they save your life. But when you look at the helmet both inside and out and see what was going on around the head area, it's pretty amazing that people get out of there alive.
I actually slid out at the track most recently. I was at a track day up in Alabama, and I just had a minor slide out in a turn. And it was not eventful for the most part. But the one thing I do remember is at one point, my head smacked the ground. And, had I not had a good helmet or not had a helmet, certainly would have been severely injured. But even with the helmet, I was seeing some stars there. And that is nothing compared to when you get hit by a car, launched over a car hood. So, I want all my motorcyclists, when they get hit, to make sure their head gets checked out, be it at the ER, at the concussion center, or whatever doctor they go to. That's the most valuable thing you carry on your body is your brain.
Yeah, it's amazing how often it goes undiagnosed or untreated because people just think it's normal that their head hurts after an accident, whether they're in a motorcycle, a car, whatever it may be. It's amazing how many times we talk to clients who are like, immediately after the accident, how are you feeling? Oh, I think I'm okay. I've got a headache or my back hurts, but I'm sure it'll go away. And it's quite the opposite. I mean, when that adrenaline wears off, things get worse, not better.
Before we met you guys and really got a lot more education on concussions, and Jared will remember this case. It was a brother and sister riding in a car. They got into a wreck. It was a pretty bad wreck, but the ER reports were, or the reports from the clients were fairly uneventful. So at the time, we didn't ask them to go and get checked up further for their heads. We got the accident or the hospital records, 45, 50 days later. And suddenly we're reading it. And the entire time the daughter was in the hospital, she was experiencing severe symptoms of post-concussion. She was vomiting, nauseous, having trouble, blurred vision, things like that. And all the hospital was doing was giving her anti-nausea meds instead of getting her into a CAT scan or an MRI or anything that they could do to look at the brain and make sure things were okay. Luckily, nowadays we have a much better protocol when talking to clients to make sure we catch head injuries immediately.
Nice. And that's what I wanted to get into is how, I guess the right way to ask it is, when did you guys start that practice of making sure that every person gets some type of head injury looked at? And the immediate follow-up to that is, what brought on, or do you think what brought on the attention, I'll say, that head injuries and TBIs are now getting, not just in motorcycle cases, but in all PI cases?
Yeah, I mean, before I would say before it was our common practice, if there was a serious accident or serious injury, there was complaints that were related to a concussion, we would make sure they got checked out, and many times it turned out to be a TBI. But really it was after meeting with you guys and talking to you for the first time that we realized how prevalent this undiagnosed concussion problem was.
Our intake, literally now, we ask about what body parts hurt, how do they hurt? And we even have questions specifically tailored to say, have you had nausea, dizziness, blurred vision, headaches or repeated headaches? Because, some people have told me, they say, I've been having headaches ever since the car accident, but I figured it was due to stress. And I'm like, let's get you to someone who can tell you if that's the case or not.
Yeah, right. Rather than us all sitting around guessing and playing doctor, let's let the actual doctors figure out what's going on.
Right.
Gotcha. You guys mentioned sports when we first started talking. Do you think that the recent, conversations around CTE and concussion, specifically in football and soccer, and to a lesser extent basketball, even in the playoffs this year, you've seen 5 to 10 people who got taken right out of the game and put in what they call concussion protocol right there on the sideline. Do you think that bled over into personal injury at all?
I think it brings it more to the forefront because, most people follow sports. Not a lot of people follow what's going on in the legal industry, the trials, correct, unless it's Johnny Depp and Amber Heard. So, I think it certainly it makes the general public, and that's who makes up your juries when you go to trial. It makes the general public understand and grasp the severity of what a concussion, because when you say TBI, that's traumatic brain injury, right? And so people say, well, I had concussions when I was in high school playing football. It's not that big a deal. Well, nowadays people are realizing that, a concussion is a traumatic brain injury. It's not just an acronym that we use.
And it's not a one-time thing. It used to be you got a concussion, you shook it off. Maybe if you had to go to the ER told you to wake up periodically throughout the night, things like that. And at least I believe that a lot more people realize now that a concussion is not just something you shake off, walk off, and that not only do you need to monitor it, you might need to treat it, and that it has permanent and long-lasting implications. And I would think a lot of the sports stuff at least brought that to the public's eye, and helps us out that we have jurors who have a good understanding about this now because they've heard about it. People they know had long-term effects. Sports stars they know, had total behavioral changes because of concussions.
That's a really good correlation that I hadn't made before, is the effect on the jury just by them following sports and not so much education.
We just had a local football star played college football locally, played in the NFL for years and years, was probably on most people's fantasy football teams for the last decade. And he just passed away out of nowhere recently as a result of long-term symptoms from a head injury from a car accident.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. It's certainly something I consider even now. You know, I played football from the first grade up until my senior year of high school. And, you know, I'm hesitant to put my kids into a football program, knowing what I know now about head injuries and how they can affect people. So certainly outside looking in, I consider them to be something very severe, something that is not just part of life.
Yeah, and then earlier this week, the former running back for the Dallas Cowboys, 38 years old, and they're surmising that there was some sort of CTE that caused him to pass away.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's really prevalent. And so what do you guys think needs to be done, both on the attorney side and the provider side, to either keep the focus on traumatic brain injuries or to push it further, or if you think it needs to be pushed further?
I think, you know, we're still seeing a difference in between an ER in a metropolitan area versus some of the more rural areas. And in the more rural areas, you're still seeing the, you know, make sure you wake up periodically through the night. You think you have a concussion. Down in Atlanta, it's been my experience that they're doing scans of people's heads. They're asking them to follow up with neurologists or, you know, other doctors. I would like to see it become common practice that if you get a concussion, that, you know, they're doing their due diligence to check for additional damage, sending you for follow-ups. But the other thing is actually diagnosing concussions is super important. Instead of just, you might have had a concussion, saying, look, you had one, makes the difference in people's treatment than you may have had one.
Yeah. Yeah. You guys were mentioning earlier about some cases where you have included TBIs on, that you felt like it made a big difference. Is there one particular case that comes to mind you guys don't mind sharing with us?
Well, we had a motorcycle accident in which the hospital really pushed our guy out kind of quickly. And this was because it was during the height of COVID and they were trying to keep people out of hospitals. But it was fairly clear that our client had received a pretty bad concussion and ended up sending him to you guys. He went and treated with a neurologist. And, you know, there was some extensive treatment there. We ultimately settled that one for $550,000, which was the policy limits. The maximum available, because it was a city vehicle that was involved. That was one that was really great.
I got one that I can remember. It's not necessarily focused just around the TBI, but maybe when I very first started doing personal injury law, which probably would have been 12 plus years ago, I had a mediation on what was at the time one of my biggest cases. And the client had a TBI, was unable to return to work. And a large portion of our damages came from his loss of a six-figure income at his job because he couldn't perform the duties due to the TBI. And at the mediation, I'll still remember opposing counsels really harping on the fact that he doesn't think our guy really had a TBI that kept him out of work because he had gone on a vacation. And so we're questioning what vacation, what are you talking about? He brings out the pictures to show me and the mediator, and it was my client's wedding. He had gotten married after the accident. He was already engaged at the time of the accident, but because he got married, they were really trying to harp on the fact that, look, here's a guy living his normal life. If he can go on these vacations, he can go and work. And he had no idea it was the guy's wedding in the photos. So we ended up convincing them that their position didn't hold much water, and they ended up paying him a good six-figure settlement. So.
Wow, that's pretty funny that the mediator is trying to classify a wedding as a vacation. Or was he trying to say this guy has a TBI and here's proof because he went and got married? Yeah. only somebody with a TBI goes and gets married. So, but yeah, those are cool, man. Something else I've been thinking about, and I asked an attorney about this on the last episode, and I kind of sort of want to keep the conversation going, is around these self-driving cars. And I see the technology within the car progressing. However, I'm not seeing any of the safety features in the car progressing. So if we get all these George Jetson cars that are flying around, driving us everywhere, and accidents still occur because there are humans involved, accidents will still occur. What kind of impact do you guys see on the personal injury market with the introduction of these autonomous type cars?
Well,
Oh, go ahead.
one thing, I think I know where Chris is going to go, but one thing before that, I think that when these dealerships start selling these autonomous vehicles with these options, they're going to want to limit their exposure for future claims. And when you buy these vehicles, you're probably going to have to sign something along the lines of assuming the risk of any damage that occurs if you employ these features. So we're selling you a vehicle that has these features, but if you opt to use them and something goes wrong, that's on you. That's not on us. And my guess is that people who buy these vehicles aren't going to read the fine print in a auto sale contract, and they're not going to realize what they're signing up for. And whether or not those agreements even end up holding weight in court, we have no idea because we haven't seen them yet. But I can see that being one potential outcome from these types of vehicles.
You could do a whole podcast on this to even get into it. So I have some bullet points here. Is, one of the things we learned in the NFL about football equipment and concussions is that the more and more padding we put on a player, the more and more they were utilizing tackling types and the way they hit people that would still cause concussions. Just because you don't split your forehead open doesn't mean a concussion didn't happen. In fact, when they were wearing leather helmets, they're saying there may have actually been less concussions because they avoided hitting their head. They actively avoided that. So as stuff gets more and more safe in cars, G-forces will always be G-forces. And when you come to a quick stop, if you smack your head into an airbag, all of a sudden, it doesn't mean that your brain's still not getting rocked around inside your skull. It just means you didn't bash your head on the steering wheel and you're not going to have a bloody gash. So I think in terms of concussions, it doesn't mean we're in the clear on that, even as we get more and more safety equipment. When it comes to self-driving cars, maybe it causes less accidents, but when accidents happen, it moves it into a product liability stage. I do know most of these cars seem to tell you that your hands need to stay on the wheel so that you can still ultimately make the final action. We'll see how that progresses. The thing that I certainly am interested to see in sort of a philosophical sense is that at some point, an EV or a smart vehicle is going to have to make a decision between hurting one party or another when it tries to avoid an accident, but there's someone else in either lane or a pedestrian next to it. And what is the right decision and what are you liable for? If you save the pedestrian and break the bones of the car driver, who's responsible? Is that the driver? Is that the EV? And is the EV responsible for some of those negative externalities? Are they responsible if they choose to hit one person instead of the other? So that's questions for lawmakers and philosophers, and lawyers. We like to play both those roles. So I'm sure eventually we'll argue that out. But it is something that I don't think anyone has figured out yet. But I do know, some people are afraid in terms of the personal injury world, what it means for us. But, my understanding is until it gets much more advanced, these are more of assists rather than fully taking things over for folks. I've utilized them too, and there's plenty of roads that I can't utilize it because the roads are too curvy. Roads that don't have the best line painting on it oftentimes trip them up. So right now, I see them as assists, and I think we're still in the normal path. We're a little bit away from having to answer some of these tougher questions.
Yeah. While you were talking, all I kept thinking about was iRobot and the 3 laws. But I hadn't even thought about that. Roads that are a little bit worn, so the paint's left, so the car can't really tell what lane is what. Yeah, there's a lot of gray area that goes in there, and that falls kind of sort of into the same realm as these scooters with chunked up sidewalks. Who's responsible if you hit a chunked up sidewalk and flip over the scooter? My background.
Have you ever heard of the trolley experiment? Essentially, the self-driving vehicles are the trolley experiment. If you decide to sacrifice one person to save 10, are you still indebted or morally responsible for the death of the one?
Right.
And it's tough. No one has those answers.
Yeah, I know they're being tested heavily up north. When I say up north, I mean, like, I know Pittsburgh is a market where Google is testing their cars, that kind of thing. But my background being on the property damage side, I immediately went to, well, insurance is going up because now a $25,000 policy won't do crap for you if you're driving a $90,000 car. So now you're going to see minimum policy limits shoot up.
We have talked about that as well in some of our own videos that we do, as far as, the current market forces that are driving up home values and car values. Mm-hmm. Now where you go on a car lot and every vehicle is 30, 40,000 over MSRP because of the supply chain issues and all that. Mm-hmm. Now, are we going to see a rise in the minimum limits in insurance or what people opt to carry? Because somebody who is living in a home, they may have purchased that home for $200,000 10 years ago. That same home may now be worth $1 million. And so are you going to insure something that's worth $1 million the same way that you insure something that's worth 200,000?
We've seen that in cases where we looked at the home a defendant lived in. We said, this person's really underinsured. And then we looked and they had purchased the house for a third of what it's valued now. And so it didn't give a really accurate picture of the means of the folks who purchased this home. So,
but it's got ancillary problems that come along with that, because if you insured your house for what it was worth when you bought it 10 years ago, you're at risk of losing your home now. If somebody decides that you're not carrying proper insurance and says, you know what, I'm not going to sue their insurance. I'm going to go after their home directly, right, which is an option in any injury case. And so if insurance agents aren't doing their job and reaching out to their client base and saying, look, the world has changed from when you bought your insurance and you need to get with the times. A lot of people are out there driving around underinsured and living underinsured, and that's a problem.
More and more people I talk to, when you ask them about when they bought the insurance, they say, well, I went online, I clicked some check boxes, it pumped me on a number, and I ran the card.
Yes.
And they have no idea, no guidance. No one sits there and says, what are your assets and what are you protecting? And, we've got some situations even right now where some folks could be in a very, very bad spot because they underinsured themselves.
Well, I think that's a great conversation piece. And like you said earlier, we could do a whole podcast on yesterday's price not being today's value. And I kind of sort of feel like I need to go and check my insurance policies.
Send them over to us. We will do it for free. We will look at everything and let you know that you have what you need or you don't. We tell people, if you want to call us, send us your deck page.
We're not insurance agents. I can't advise you on what type of insurance to buy, but I can tell you what your insurance does cover and what some of those vulnerabilities might be. And, a lot of people, when they bring them to us and we tell them what their coverage is, they can't believe that that's what they purchased. So we always invite people, please call us, send us your deck pages. We're happy to just discuss and look at those with you.
Insurance is absolutely one of the places you cannot afford to be penny wise and pound foolish.
Awesome. And with that caveat, you guys, how can you be reached? What's your social media? Where's your office located? What's your website? What's your phone number? Office number. Don't give out your personal numbers, sirs.
Well, look, we're bulldogfirm.com. We are at the Bulldog Firm on Instagram, or at Bulldog Bike Law. Give us a call at 770-408-7000. We're located in Alpharetta, right here off North Point Parkway.
And the great thing is, if we're not in the office, our office phone goes to both our cell phones. So you can reach us. You can always get us.
Awesome. And what areas do you guys practice?
In terms of personal injury, the whole state. We've got a big hearing coming up practically at the state line in a few weeks. And I've got trials getting ready right up next to Tennessee. So when it comes to personal injury, we're everywhere. When it comes to criminal, we're almost everywhere with criminal as well. But if it's too far or in a jurisdiction we think you need someone else, we'll always help you find someone as well. So, no matter where you're located, don't hesitate to reach out.
Awesome. Well, hey guys, I appreciate your time. I appreciate your knowledge, the nuggets you dropped in with us today. And I won't hold you up anymore because it is rush hour. So I know you guys want to get home to your families and also see what type of job stability you got out there.
Yeah.
I appreciate it, guys. Thank you guys for tuning in. And this has been another episode of Talk-N-Headz. We appreciate the opportunity to fill your head, and we will see you next time.
Thank you for listening to Talking Heads. This podcast has been brought to you by the Concussion Center. We appreciate the opportunity to fill your brain with some new information regarding head injuries. If you have any additional topics you would like us to cover, please reach out to us on our various social media platforms at the Concussion Center or hit us up on our website at concussionctr.com.